Hello, welcome to day 3. This time I actually know. What a concept. What a concept, me knowing what day it is we're in our reading. Very excited to get into it today. Love me some Frankenstein. Loving her words. I really, just the first chapter when he was like describing, when Robert Walton was describing the Arctic was just like, wow, that's something else. That's something else, boyos. Yeah, I'm having a good time today. I'm gonna go finish up my eclairs and pipe them. I'm just gonna put some filling in. Hello. Just gonna put it's literally just whipped cream. So I'm gonna whip up some cream and then pipe it into the center and then put some icing on the top and do a little decorating. Then I'm gonna go take some photos. It's a long day. And all of this is to avoid doing the actual work of my project that I am supposed to do because I don't want to talk to Adobe Premiere because Adobe Premiere is very often mean to me. I can manually whip cream. It's not that hard. I mean, it's hard, but it's not that hard. Like, you can do it. I've seen the first time I saw someone do it, I'm like, you're crazy. And then they didn't. And I was like, my God, you're a god amongst people. And then I did it myself and I was like, am I a god amongst people? I'm not even that ripped, y'all. Look at that. That's my only, that's only from whipping cream. I'm sorry, Jean. I have the great privilege of having other people who go to the store for me. When I say other people, I just mean my mom. Yeah, cream whipping arms. Last week, I whipped up the stuff so hard that I literally, for like a couple of days, my elbow hurt. So I go a little too ham upon occasion. I don't think that's correct. Anywho. All right, what happened yesterday? Not a lot is the answer. Not a lot. So Victor Frankenstein, though he has not said his last name yet, which I'm excited for because I feel like she's ramping us up to it, so I'm into that. Victor was telling us basically his history. He's like, I wasn't formally educated. My dad married this woman who he had a friend, and the friend lost all his money and died. And just as Frankenstein's dad came in and found his daughter, who they eventually married, Frankenstein, Victor, is the eldest of his siblings. And for some reason, Frankenstein's dad's sister married this Italian guy, had a child. Frankenstein's dad's sister died. Is this helpful? Frankenstein's dad's sister died, leaving a child to this Italian dude. The Italian dude's like, I don't really want to take care of this girl. And so Frankenstein's dad takes in his sister's daughter, his niece, Frankenstein's cousin. And Frankenstein's mom is like, you guys are going to get married. And everyone's like, I guess that was okay then, but all right. So he told us all about this. He has a couple siblings. He's like, I'm not formally educated, which was a problem because I was just kind of like all of these philosopher dudes, specifically Agrippa, who I've never read and likely will never read, were like really big brain. And oh my God, this is a really bad summary, y'all. I did so well yesterday. He's like, I should have been trained better, but I just pretty much read Agrippa. I got signed up for one time, like a biology class, but I never went to it. And then I went at the end and I was like, I don't understand anything. I guess it's okay, John. Nothing has happened. Presumably, the guy who was chasing across the ice is the monster, but we don't know that yet because we don't know that there's a monster yet. So don't get ahead of yourselves. Anyways, nothing happened. He just described his life. And here we are. Yes, he failed to learn ethics. And now he's stuck in the Arctic. That's what happens when you don't learn ethics. All right, let's do this. Frankenstein, Chapter 2. When I had attained the age of 17, my parents resolved that I should become a student at the University of Ingolstadt. I had hitherto attended the schools of Geneva, but my father thought it necessary for the completion of my education that I should be made acquainted with other customs than those of my native country. My departure was therefore fixed at an early date, but before the day resolved upon could arrive, the first misfortune of my life occurred, an omen, as it were, of my future misery. Elizabeth had caught the scarlet fever, but her illness was not severe, and she quickly recovered. During her confinement, many arguments had been urged to persuade my mother to refrain from attending upon her. She had, at first, yielded to our entreaties, but when she heard that her favorite was recovering, she could no longer debar herself from her society, and entered her chamber long before the danger of infection was past. The consequences of this imprudence were fatal. On the third day my mother sickened. Her fever was very malignant, and the looks of her attendants prognosticated the worst event. On her deathbed, the fortitude and benignity of this admirable woman did not desert her. She joined the hands of Elizabeth and myself. "My children," said she said, first she said in English literature. "My firmest hopes of future happiness were placed on the prospect of your union. This expectation will now be the consolation of your father. Elizabeth, my love, you must supply my place to your younger cousins. Alas, I regret I am taken from you, and happy and beloved as I have been, is it not hard to quit you all? But these are not thoughts befitting me. I will endeavor to resign myself cheerfully to death, and will indulge a hope of meeting you in another world." Oh my God, Siobhan. She died calmly, and her countenance expressed affection even in death. I need not describe the feelings of those whose dearest ties are rent by that most irreparable evil, the void that presents itself to the soul, and the despair that is exhibited on the countenance. It is so long before the mind can persuade itself that she, whom we saw every day, and whose very existence appeared a part of our own, can have departed forever, that the brightness of a beloved eye can have been extinguished, and the sound of a voice so familiar and so dear to the ear can be hushed, never more to be heard. These are the reflections of the first days, but when the lapse of time proves the reality of the evil, then the actual bitterness of grief commences. Yet from whom has not that rude hand rent away some dear connection? They spelled connection as Connexion. We love the inclusion of an X. And why should I describe a sorrow which all have felt and must feel? The time at length arrives when grief is rather an indulgence than a necessity, and the smile that plays upon the lips, although it may be deemed a sacrilege, is not banished. I wanted to say banished, but this isn't Shakespeare. My mother was dead, but we had still duties which we ought to perform. We must continue our course with the rest, and learn to think ourselves fortunate, whilst one remains whom the spoiler has not seized. My journey to Ingolstadt, which had been deferred by these events, was now again determined upon. I obtained from my father a respite of some weeks. This period was sadly spent. I lost it, sorry. My mother's death and my speedy departure depressed our spirits, but Elizabeth endeavored to renew the spirit of cheerfulness in our little society. Since the death of her aunt, her mind had acquired new firmness and vigor. She determined to fulfill her duties with the greatest exactness, and she felt that that most imperious duty of rendering her uncle and cousins happy had devolved upon her. She consoled me, amused her uncle, instructed my brothers, and I never beheld her so enchanting as at this time, when she was continually endeavoring to contribute to the happiness of others, entirely forgetful of herself. That sucks. For her. The day of my departure at length arrived. I had taken leave of all my friends, except Clerval, who spent the last evening with us. He bitterly lamented that he was unable to accompany me, but his father could not be persuaded to part with him, intending that he should become a partner with him in business, in compliance with his favorite theory that learning was superfluous to the commerce of ordinary life. Henry had a refined mind. He had no desire to be idle, and was well pleased to become his father's partner, but he believed that a man might be a very good trader, and yet possess a cultivated understanding. We sat late listening to his complaints and making many little arrangements for the future. The next morning early I departed. Tears gushed from the eyes of Elizabeth. They proceeded partly from sorrow at my departure, and partly because she reflected that the same journey was to have taken place 3 months before, when a mother's blessing would have accompanied me. I threw myself into the chaise that was to convey me away, and indulged in the most melancholy reflections. I, who had ever been surrounded by amiable companions, continually engaged in endeavoring to bestow mutual pleasure, I was now alone. In the university whither I was going, I must form my own friends and be my own protector. My life had hitherto been remarkably secluded and domestic, and this had given me invincible repugnance to new countenances. I loved my brothers, Elizabeth and Clerval. These were old familiar faces, but I believed myself totally unfitted for the company of strangers. Such were my reflections as I commenced my journey. But as I proceeded, my spirits and hopes rose. I ardently desired the acquisition of knowledge. I had often, when at home, thought it hard to remain during my youth cooped up in one place, and had longed to enter the world and take my station among other human beings. Now my desires were complied with, and it would, indeed, have been folly to repent. I had sufficient leisure for these and many other reflections during my journey to Ingolstadt, which was long and fatiguing. At length the high white steeple of the town met my eyes. I alighted and was conducted to my solitary apartment to spend the evening as I pleased. The next morning I delivered my letters of introduction and paid a visit to some of the principal professors, and among others to oh no! What's German for, no, it would be hair. So, oh no, it's French. It's French, everybody! To Monsieur Krempe, professor of natural philosophy. He received me with politeness and asked me several questions concerning my progress in the different branches of science appertaining to natural philosophy. I mentioned, it is true, with fear and trembling, the only authors I had ever read upon those subjects. The professor started. Have you, he said, really spent your time in studying such nonsense? I'm sorry, guys. I gotta do the French. Have you? This is so bad. I love it. Okay. Have you, he said, really spent your time in studying such nonsense? I replied in the affirmative. Every minute, continued Monsieur Krempe with warmth. Every instant that you have wasted on those books is utterly and entirely lost. You have burdened your memory with exploded systems and useless names. Good God! In what desert land have you lived where no one was kind enough to inform you that these fancies, which you have so greedily imbibed, are 1,000 years what am I doing? Are 1,000 years old and as musty as they are ancient? I little expected in this enlightened and scientific age to find a disciple of Albertus Magnus and Paracelsus. My dear sir, you must begin your studies entirely anew. So saying, he stepped aside and wrote down a list of several books treating of natural philosophy, which he desired me to procure, and dismissed me after mentioning that in the beginning of the following week he intended to commence a course of lectures upon natural philosophy and its general relations, and that Monsieur, I feel like they can't all be French, and that Monsieur Waldman, it's Master Waldman. Whew. Okay, we're all right. Master Waldman, a fellow professor, would lecture upon chemistry the alternate days that he missed. You guys have been saved. I returned home not disappointed, for I had long considered those authors useless whom the professor had so strongly reprobated. But I did not feel much inclined to study the books which I procured at his recommendation. Master Krempe was a little squat man with a gruff voice and repulsive countenance. The teacher, therefore, did not prepossess me in favor of his doctrine. Besides, I had a contempt for the uses of modern natural philosophy. It was very different when the masters of the science sought immortality and power. Such views, although futile, were grand. But now the scene was changed. The ambition of the inquirer seemed to limit itself to the annihilation of those visions on which my interest in science was chiefly founded. I was required to exchange chimeras of boundless grandeur for realities of little worth. Wow, what a phrase. Such were my reflections during the first 2 or 3 days spent almost in solitude. But as the ensuing week commenced, I thought of the information which Master Kremp had given me concerning the lectures. And although I could not consent to go and hear that little conceited fellow deliver sentences out of a pulpit, I recollected what he had said of Master Waldman, whom I had never seen, as he had hitherto been out of town. I feel like Frankenstein is king of making up excuses to not go to class. Partly from curiosity and partly from idleness, I went into the lecturing room, which Master Waldman entered shortly after. This professor was very unlike his colleague. He appeared about 50 years of age, but with an aspect expressive of the greatest benevolence. A few gray hairs covered his temples, but those at the back of his head were nearly black. His person was short but remarkably erect, and his voice the sweetest I had ever heard. He began his lecture by a recapitulation, I feel like that's wrong, but I'm going to go with it, of the history of chemistry and the various improvements made by different men of learning, pronouncing with fervor the names of the most distinguished discoverers. He then took a cursory view of the present state of the science, and explained many of its elementary terms. After having made a few preparatory experiments, he concluded with a panegyric upon modern chemistry, the terms of which I shall never forget. "The ancient teachers of this science," said he, "promised impossibilities and performed nothing. The modern masters promise very little. They know that metals cannot be transmuted, and that the elixir of life is a chimera. But these philosophers, whose hands seem only to be made to dabble in dirt, and their eyes to pore over the microscope or crucible, have indeed performed miracles. They penetrate into the recesses of nature, and show how she works in her hiding places. They ascend into the heavens. They have discovered how blood circulates and the nature of the air we breathe. They have acquired new and almost unlimited powers. They can command the thunders of heaven, mimic the earthquake, and even mock the invisible world with its own shadows." I departed highly pleased. Yes, they did, because he talked about boron in the last chapter. I departed highly pleased with the professor and his lecture, and paid him a visit the same evening. His manners in private were even more mild and attractive than in public, for there was a certain dignity in his mind during his lecture, which his own house was replaced by the greatest affability and kindness. He heard with attention my little narration concerning my studies, and smiled at the names of Cornelius Agrippa and Paracelsus, but without the contempt that Master Kremp had exhibited. He said that these were the men to whose indefatigable zeal modern philosophers were indebted for most of the foundations of their knowledge. They had left to us as an easier task of their knowledge. They had left to, oh shit, sorry. I just read the wrong sentence twice. Indebted for most of the foundations of their knowledge. They had left to us an easier task, to give new names and arrange in connected classifications the facts which they in great degree had been the instruments of bringing to light. The labors of men genius. The labors of men of genius, however erroneously directed, scarcely ever fail in ultimately turning the solid advantage of mankind. I listened to his statement, which was delivered without any presumption or affection, and then added that his lecture had removed my prejudices against modern chemists, and I, at the same time, requested his advice concerning the books I ought to procure. "I'm happy," said Master Waldman, "to have gained a disciple, and if your application equals your ability, I have no doubt of your success. Chemistry is that branch of natural philosophy in which the greatest improvements have been and may be made. It is on that account that I have made it my peculiar study, but at the same time I have not neglected the other branches of science. A man would make but a very sorry chemist if he attended to that department of human knowledge alone. If your wish is to become really a man of science, and not merely a petty experimentalist, I should advise you to apply to every branch of natural philosophy, including mathematics." He then took me into his laboratory and explained to me the uses of his various machines, instructing me as to what I ought to procure, and promising me the use of his own when I should have advanced far enough in the science not to derange their mechanism. He also gave me the list of books which I had requested, and I took my leave. Thus ended a day memorable to me. It decided my future destiny. Hmm. Let's see what's happening. How many? What? Huh. All right. I don't know. It'll be another 15 minutes. Let's do it. Let's do it. Um, Frankenstein, Chapter 3. From this day, natural philosophy, and particularly chemistry, in the most comprehensive sense of the term, became nearly my sole occupation. I read with ardor these words, so full of genius and discrimination, which modern inquiries have written on these subjects. I attended the lectures and cultivated the acquaintance of the men of science of the university, and I found even in Master Krempe a great deal of sound sense and real information, combined, it is true, with a repulsive physiognomy physiognomy, physiognomy, don't know, and manners, but not on that account the less valuable. In Master Walden I found a true friend. His gentleness was never tinged by dogmatism, and his instructions were given with an air of frankness and good nature that banished every idea of pedantry. It was perhaps the amiable character of this man that inclined me more to that branch of natural philosophy which he professed, than an intrinsic love for the science itself. Excuse me. But this state of mind had placed only in the first steps towards knowledge. The more fully I entered into the science, the more exclusively I pursued it for its own sake. That application, which at first had been a matter of duty and resolution, now became so ardent and eager that the stars often disappeared in the light of morning, whilst I was yet engaged in my laboratory. As I applied so closely, it may be easily conceived that I improved rapidly. My ardor was indeed the astonishment of the students, and my proficiency that of the masters. Professor Krempe often asked me, with a sly smile, how Cornelius Agrippa went on, whilst Master Walden expressed the most heartfelt exultation in my progress. 2 years passed in this manner, during which I paid no visit to Geneva, but was engaged heart and soul in the pursuit of some discoveries which I hoped to make. None but those who have experienced them can conceive of the enticements of science. In other studies, you go as far as others have gone before you, and there is nothing more to know. But in a scientific pursuit, there is continual food for discovery and wonder. A mind of moderate capacity, which closely pursues one study, must infallibly arrive at a great proficiency in that in that study. And I, who continually sought the attainment of one subject of pursuit, and was solely wrapped up in this, improved so rapidly that, at the end of 2 years, I made some discoveries in the improvement of some chemical instruments, which procured me great esteem and admiration at the university. When I had arrived at this point, and had become as well acquainted with the theory and practice of natural philosophy as depended on the lessons of any of the professors at Ingolstadt, my residence there being no longer conducive to my improvements, I thought of returning to my friends and my native town, when an incident happened that protracted my stay. I love that. I don't know. I want to say that she started this because I don't think I've read it like this in a book before, but I've certainly felt it after her thing of going when something something something, ba da 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 da, like a mystery happens at the end of her paragraph. I think that's what it like. I think it's a cool trope. I feel like trope is the wrong word. I don't know. A cool. At some point, I knew the word for this. In film, it would be a. I don't even know what it would be. Film. There's something in film when something keeps coming back up. A motif. Yes, it's a motif. Thanks, Dane. Okay, back at it again. One of the phenomena which had peculiarly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame, and indeed any animal enuded with life. Whence, I often asked myself, did the principle of life proceed? It was a bold question, and one which has ever been considered as a mystery. Yet, with how many things are we upon the brink of becoming acquainted, if cowardice or carelessness did not restrain our inquiries? I revolved these circumstances in my mind and determined thenceforth to apply myself more particularly to those branches of natural philosophy which relate to physiology. Unless I had been animated by an almost supernatural enthusiasm, my application to this study would have been irksome and almost intolerable. To examine the causes of life, we must first have recourse to death. I became acquainted with the science of anatomy, but this was not sufficient. I must also observe the natural decay and corruption of the human body. In my education, my father had taken the greatest precautions that my mind should be impressed with no supernatural horrors. I do not ever remember having to. Oh, excuse me. So sorry. um, I do not ever remember to have trembled at a tale of superstition. Very superstitious. Sorry. Or to have feared the apparition of a spirit. Darkness had no effect upon my fancy, and a churchyard was to me merely the receptacle of bodies deprived of life, which, from being the seat of beauty and strength, had become food for the worm. Now I was led to examine the cause and progress of this decay, and forced to spend days and nights in vaults and charnel houses. My attention was fixed upon every object the most insupportable to the delicacy of the human feelings. I saw how the fine form of man was degraded and wasted. I beheld the corruption of death succeeded to the blooming cheek of life. I saw how the worm inherited the wonders of the eye and brain. I paused, examining and analyzing all the minutiae of causation as exemplified in the change from life to death and death to life, until from the midst of this darkness a sudden light broke in upon me. A light so brilliant and wondrous, yet so simple, that while I became dizzy with the immensity of the prospect which it illustrated, I was surprised that among so many men of genius who had directed their inquiries towards the same science, that I alone should be reserved to discover so astonishing a secret. Thank you. I'm responding to bless you. Remember, I am not recording the visions of a madman. The sun does not more certainly shine in the heavens than that which I now affirm is true. Some miracle might have produced it, yet the stages of discovery were distinct and probable. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay, more, I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. Oh, sorry, I just really zoomed past that. You did what now, Frankenstein? Boy. The astonishment which I had first experienced on this discovery soon gave place to delight and rapture. After so much time spent in painful labor, to arrive at once at the summit of my desires was the most gratifying consummation of my toils. But this discovery was so great and overwhelming that all the steps by which I had been progressively led to it were obliterated, and I beheld only the result. What had been the study and desire of the wisest men since the creation of the world was now within my grasp. Not that, like a magic scene, it all opened upon me at once. The information I had obtained was of a nature rather to direct my endeavors so soon as I should point them towards the object of my search, than to exhibit that object already accomplished. I was like an Arabian who had been buried with the dead and found a passage to life aided only by one glimmering and seemingly ineffectual light. I see by your eagerness and the wonder and hope which your eyes express, my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret with which I am acquainted. That cannot be. Listen patiently until the end of my story, and you will easily perceive why I am reserved upon that subject. I will not lead you on, unguarded and ardent as I then was, to your destruction and infallible misery. Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. Good God. When I found so astonishing a power placed within my hands, I hesitated a long time concerning the matter in which I should employ it. Although I possessed the capacity of bestowing animation, yet to prepare a frame. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I just was like, I was thinking, I haven't eaten lunch yet. This is very important, I assure you. I was thinking, like, "God, what am I gonna eat for lunch?" And then I was like, "Oh, I have some marinara sauce, and my dad's been stirring it in with quinoa," which doesn't feel like the right thing to do with really good marinara sauce from a really good Italian restaurant. I'm like, what am I gonna do?" And then I was like, I could make a mozzarella stick. And then I was like, I have mozzarella sticks. I'm gonna have mozzarella sticks and marinara sauce. Very important. This is I'm clearly fully concentrated on Frankenstein right now. Anyways, Frankenstein was doing something shady, and then I got distracted by cheese. I really don't know where I was. Okay, I'm just gonna. I think this is the last place I remember. Place. Oh, Shiv, you're living you're living the good life. Okay. When I found so astonishing a power placed within my hands, I hesitated a long time concerning the manner in which I should employ it. Although I possessed the capacity of bestowing animation, yet to prepare a frame for the reception of it with all its intricacies of fibers, muscles, and veins, still remained a work of inconceivable difficulty and labor. I doubted at first whether I should attempt the creation of a being like myself or one of simpler organization, but my imagination was too much exalted by my first success to permit me to doubt my ability to give life to an animal as complex and wonderful as man. The materials at present within my command hardly appeared adequate to so arduous an undertaking, but I doubted not that I should ultimately succeed. I prepared myself for a multitude of reverses. My operations might be incessantly baffled, and at last my work be imperfect. Yet, when I considered the improvement which every day takes place in science and mechanics, I was encouraged to hope my present attempts would at least lay the foundations of future successes. Nor could I consider the magnitude and complexity of my plan as any argument of its impracticability. It was with these feelings that I began the creation of a human being. Boy, as the minuteness of the parts formed a great hindrance to my speed, I resolved, contrary to my first intention, to make the being of a gigantic stature, that is to say, about 8 feet in height and proportionably large. After having formed this determination, and having spent some months in successfully collecting and arranging my materials, I began. Now, how did you do that, Frankenstein? How exactly did you do that? No one can conceive of the variety of feeling which bore me onwards like a hurricane in the first enthusiasm of success. Is he alive? Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds, which I should first break through, and pour a torrent of light into our dark world. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. Pursuing these reflections, I thought that if I could bestow animation upon lifeless matter, I might, in process of time, although I now found it impossible, renew life where death had apparently devoted the body to corruption. These thoughts supported my spirits while I pursued my undertaking with unremitting ardor. Ardor's a big word for us. My cheek had grown pale with study, and my person had become emaciated with confinement. Sometimes, on the very brink of certainty, I failed, yet I still clung to the hope which the next day or next hour might realize. One secret which I alone possessed was the hope to which I had dedicated myself, and the moon gazed on my midnight labors, while, with unrelaxed and breathless eagerness, I pursued nature to her hiding places. Who shall conceive the horrors of my secret toil, as I dabbled among the unhallowed damps of the grave, or tortured the living animal to animate the lifeless clay? My limbs now tremble, and my eyes swim with the remembrance. But then, but then, a resistless and almost frantic impulse urged me forward. I seemed to have lost all soul or sensation but for this one pursuit. It was indeed but a passing trance that only made me feel with renewed acuteness. So soon as the unnatural stimulus ceasing to operate, I had returned to my old habits. I collected bones from charnel houses and distributed with profane fingers the tremendous secrets of the human frame. In a solitary chamber, or rather cell, at the top of the house and separated from all the other apartments by a gallery and staircase, I kept my workshop of filthy creation. My eyeballs were starting from their sockets in attending to the details of my employment. The dissecting room and the slaughterhouse furnished many of my materials, and often did my human nature turn with loathing from my occupation, whilst still urged on by an eagerness which perpetually increased. I brought my work near to a conclusion. The summer months passed while I was thus engaged, heart and soul, in one pursuit. It was a most beautiful season. Never did the fields bestow a more plentiful harvest, or the vines yield a more luxuriant vintage. But my eyes were insensible to the charms of nature, and the same feelings which made me neglect the scenes around me caused me also to forget those friends who were so many miles absent, and whom I had not seen for so long a time. I knew my silence disquieted them, and I well remembered the words of my father. I know that while you are pleased with yourself, you will think of us with affection, and we shall hear regularly from you. You must pardon me if I regard any interruption in your correspondence as proof that your other duties are equally neglected. I knew well, therefore, what would be my father's feelings, but I could not tear my thoughts from my employment, loathsome in itself, but which had taken an irresistible hold of my imagination. I wished, as it were, to procrastinate all that related to my feelings of affection until the great object which swallowed up every habit of my nature should be completed. I then thought that my father would be unjust if he ascribed my neglect to vice, or faultiness on my part, but I am now convinced that he was justified in conceiving that I should not be altogether free from blame. A human being in perfection ought always to preserve a calm and peaceful mind, and never to allow passion or transitory desire to disturb his tranquillity. I do not think that the pursuit of knowledge is an exception to this rule. If the study to which you apply yourself has a tendency to weaken your affections, and to destroy your taste for those simple pleasures in which no alloy can possibly mix, then that study is certainly unlawful, that is to say, not benefiting the human mind. If this rule were always observed, if no man allowed any pursuit whatsoever to interfere with the tranquillity of his domestic affections, Greece had not been enslaved, Caesar would have spared his country, America would have been discovered more gradually, and the empires of Mexico and Peru had not been destroyed. But I forgot that I am moralizing in the most interesting part of my tale, and your looks remind me to proceed. My father made no reproach in his letters, and only took notice of my silence by inquiring into my occupations more particularly than before. Winter, spring, and summer had passed away during my labors, but I did not watch the blossom or the expanding leaves, sights which before always yielded me supreme delight, so deeply was I engrossed in my occupation. The leaves of that year had withered before my work drew near to a close, and now every day showed me more plainly how well I had succeeded. My enthusiasm was checked by my anxiety, and I appeared rather like one doomed by slavery to toil in the mines, or any other unwholesome trade, than an artist occupied by his favorite employment. Every night I was oppressed by slow fervor, and I think it's fervor. I can't tell the difference between fervor and fever, to be honest with you. And I became nervous to a most painful degree, a disease that I regretted the more because I had hitherto enjoyed a most excellent health, and had always boasted of the firmness of my nerves. But I believed that exercise and amusement would soon drive away such symptoms, and I promised myself both of these when my creation should be complete. That's the end of chapter 3. Yeah. I'm not as into it as I thought I would be. I love the exceptionally rich use of words. I love, like, oh, thanks, Dane. You're right. It was fever. You should get that checked out then. I think there's a little more, like, humanity stuff Does that make sense? Then in the previous two books, if we waxed poetic, it was never to this scale of poeticness, I think. There were certainly descriptions of houses and etc., which were not always 100% necessary, but there weren't such deep delvings into like the status of humanity. Maybe it's that that's what I was just thinking. I was thinking that it might be because it's from his point of view, and I don't like him that much. He's like, surely he repents, but that's not enough for me to like him. In a screenplay, I would be like, you need to establish more why I should like your protagonist, because I just don't right now. Except I wouldn't say it like that, because I try very hard to be nice when I give constructive criticism. It's very important to me. No, he's a young man who's enamored with his own power, which I guess is why I don't like him, because he's a young man enamored with his own knowledge. And I'm like, I've dealt with a lot of those. I don't know. I think I might like it better when the monster appears. I don't know. It's a little more, I don't know. I'll continue to, I'll update you as we go. I've been reading the script to Sense and Sensibility, because I'm supposed to read scripts. The words Emma Thompson uses are so, I'm clicking it so I can try and, oh my God, it scrolled me to the top. The words that Emma Thompson uses, I think there was like, when Marianne comes in and says like, how did you find the silver? It was like trunculently, which is incredible. What an incredible word. And I wanted to like, I'm literally like thinking about writing down all of these incredible words that she's using. But anyways, it's a great script. I think the monster is on his way. He's being created. I want it to be like more about, it's so, I think it's so like cerebral. It's a lot in Victor's head about like, this is what I was thinking at this time, and less about this is what I was doing at this time. And since I'm such a person, I really love strong central plots. I love the plot. I want to know about the plot. I want to feel the atmosphere, and I don't feel the atmosphere. I just feel Victor. And since I don't like Victor, it's tough. So that's what I think my deal is right now. We'll see. Interesting things. All right. I will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow is Monday. Dear God, I have not done any of my work. But first, I'm going to go make some little eclairs and some mozzarella sticks, and life is beautiful. Okie doke. See you tomorrow at 3 o'clock. It has been wonderful to hang out with you, as always. I wish you a better day than Victor is having. Okie dokie. Goodbye. Good.